let's talk about how you get one. and move on to because it can be a long process, and there's lots of different ways that board seats get filled. So it's not a linear process either, right? That there's one path to get there. So Steve, do you want to give us some opening comments on the best ways to get a board seat?
I do, and I do want to though add to what you were just mentioning, Kris, a moment ago, which is we're giving you all the reasons what to be careful for, and yet on the other hand, we all live amongst board members who adore what they do, are extraordinarily good at what they do, and will do this for many years to come. So yes, we put out some red flags, but board service is something that is very valuable to yourself, to the companies, to the community. So we want to encourage people to look at it from a positive point of view, but just beware. So look, on how to get onto a board, obviously the landscape is changing very, very, very quickly. And we've all heard, I suspect, what Governor Abbott said earlier today about state universities and DE&I, and same thing in Florida. Make no mistake, DE&I is a very high agenda item for every one of the boards that we work with. So this is not something that's coming and going. It is there. It is there permanently. And I say that because to give you a sort of a sense that boards that are highly diverse in every sense of the term, we have quantifiable information that says are more effective than boards that are not. And so, boards are actively looking for diversity in lots of different ways. And in many cases, we've seen where boards will actually increase the board size for a period of time in order to get the diversity on a more accelerated basis. Because part of the criticism that you hear from investor groups and so forth is that it takes so long to refresh boards. If you've got a board of 9 white men and you look at a normal cadence of retirement, it could take 9, 10, 12, 15 years before you had some kind of truly diverse. So boards are thinking about how do we accelerate this very much. So back to how do you get on a board? Look, there are lots of ways to do it. First of all, you really need to think about what are you good at doing? And Travis, I wanted to go on a board until you told me all the things that I have to do as a board member. The fact is, you really need to look into your soul and say, yeah, this is something not only can I do, but I can do very well. Because as you go through the interviewing process, if it's not your sweet spot, or if your references would suggest that you don't come to meetings as well prepared as perhaps you should, or things of that nature, it's not going to work. So you really do need to be very honest with yourself and say, yeah, this is something I have the time to do, B, I have the interest to do, and more importantly, I can add something to the boards I might join. And that might be in terms of an expertise, whether it's cybersecurity or supply chain. It also might be by, if you want to define an industry vertical or a restructuring capability. So you need to sort of inventory your own skill set. The two or three other things I would mention is your best reference, without a doubt, in my view, will be your own company board, whether you're an executive in that company or whether you're the CEO. They will understand. In other words, if I get an inbound call or email from a board member who says, we have the CFO who would both benefit from being a board member and would be really good at being a board member, that's a board member who knows what it takes to be a board member. And therefore, I will take his recommendation very, very highly and will be active in trying to help the CFO get on a board. So look to your own board for the recommendation. Secondly, your own CEO. And this is very important. If you're not a sitting CEO, we want to know from the outset whether this company that you're working for will support you serving on a board at this moment in time. And there's a rule of thumb, which is we never want, and companies never want, a first-year employee to be serving on an outside board. So if you join you join a company and you're the CFO in your first year, you should be heads down, learning your job, doing what you're being paid to do as a full-time basis before thinking about going on to a board. The third piece, super important, is don't think of this as a CV-driven exercise. Think of it more as a board biography exercise. So craft something that is very compelling, that really speaks to not just your executive career, but the kinds of work that you have done that would resonate with board members who are looking for someone to join their board. Kris, I was struck by all the types of board service that you have had, from public to private to nonprofit, and I think you should be very inclusive of board-like experience in this bio. Two examples. One would be many companies have joint ventures. These are internal boards, but function in a fiduciary way, maybe without all the same bells and whistles of what Travis explained, but they behave like a board in many ways. The other would be what I would call meaningful nonprofits, and meaningful defined as hospital systems, universities, the larger nonprofits where they're making very serious decisions each and every day of their existence. That will give people a sense that you know how to operate around a boardroom table. You're collaborative, you come prepared. As Travis said, you come prepared, you've read your materials, that this is the kind of person they can rely on in a good day and a bad day. So let me just stop there and turn it over back to you, Kris.
No, it's very interesting. So I have to do like in the boards I've served on, when I think of my very first board was I went to the chair of our board when I was an executive and said, for development purposes, I think I need to understand what it's like to sit on the other side of the table. Mm-hmm. And he went to the search firms that were doing the work for our board and said, I have an executive, exactly what you said, right? And that was my very first public board. And I got a board through a networking dinner. I got a board through a long-term thought partner who said, after 6 years of chatting about governance, called and said, I have your board, right? And it had all of from a fit perspective, it was my industry, it was my governance structure, it was everything that she knew I was going to be the leading candidate for that seat, no matter what. And I've even gotten a board seat through an ex-employee who was, asked at another company to recommend potential director candidates. So there's a huge variety of things that you can do in order to get a board seat. And I do think patience is super important in this. Can you touch though on the, because obviously what percentage of board seats go through search?
Yeah, that's a question we obviously, Kris, hear frequently. And let me first explain that search firms are more and more involved in searches because it is no longer the country club variety of putting a board together where you would put your 4 or 5 buddies on the board. And literally that happened up until fairly recently. We mentioned at the outset this notion around DE&I, diversity, broadly speaking, enormously important. And very often, these are not individuals who the current board members will be familiar enough with in order to populate on them by themselves. So, others on the phone might opine, but I would say a good 50% of searches today go through a search firm in one form or other. But an important caveat to this is you should not think of search firms versus non-search firms. It's a continuum of information, and we work very closely with our boards who will themselves nominate people that they have met. Kris, just like you described, the board that you went on, I don't know if there's a search firm involved or not, but very often when we start a search, in fact, always when we start a search, we will say to the board, or the board will say to us, oh, here's a little file of people we've collected over the last year or two, include them in the process. And we're always very insistent that the economics of recruiting someone who's been introduced to us by a board member versus someone we may have introduced in the process is exactly the same, so that there is not a bias towards taking a board member introduced by the board versus someone introduced by the search firm. So it's all of the above is really the answer.
Yeah, I think, when I think about my own, even if I was referred by a person that I met and networked with, that reference ended up going into a search firm who managed with all of the other candidates. So
because really, if
you're
you think about it, the name identification, thanks to LinkedIn and many other databases, including NACD, by the way, is really the easy part of the job. The more important part is qualifications, it's fit, it's all of the other stuff that goes around putting a board together versus just finding a name and finding a person.
And to that specific point, advocacy, like having people that are going to advocate for you in that decision-making process is important. If you don't know anybody at the company, if you don't know anybody at the search firm, even if they find you on LinkedIn, you're probably not going to get it, right? Unless you're just a perfect fit. And I think that goes back to Steve's point about networking and being involved and knowing these companies where you might get selected.
I would love for you guys just to provide some tips on effective networking, and because I do think there's good ways and there's healthier ways and less healthy ways to network, and I'm sure the audience would appreciate your insights there.
Well, Travis, you want to start?
Sure. I think the best way to network is to offer something for nothing, frankly. I mean, I think what you do is you meet people, you see what they're interested in, and you try to give them value without an expectation of something in return. And that's how you build a real network where people know you and can rely on you. And then if they do happen to find a use for you in the future, they know that you're somebody that, isn't just there having casual drinks with strangers all the time. You're actually a real person, and you actually can help them in what they're doing. And then your reputation, I think, is the second part. You have got to maintain a reputation of professionalism, of somebody who's qualified and eligible to be a director. I think that participating in NACD, getting certified, those types of things are very important to maintain that as part of your networking efforts.
David?
I really echo what Travis had to say. In my experience, being able to deliver real value to people and reputation through doing great work, those are the ways that I've found are the most effective ways to network.
Yeah.
But I do think that broadly speaking, it varies from one person to the next what's going to be the most effective way. Delivering value is key.
And I'll just do a slight variation on that, but basically the same theme, which is know what you're good at and what you're not. For you to be raising your hand every time you get a phone call, thinking you're the right person. I'm coming back to what David and Travis just said, is we much more appreciate when you say, look, that one is not for me. Oh, here is someone who I think would be very, very good at it. But since I've got you on the phone, let me just spend a few minutes telling you what I really am interested in. So you've given them something for free, as David and Travis said, but you've also had 5 minutes of the ear to say, look, I really am interested in joining a board. These are the things that I would be most qualified for, never mind the most interested for. And that resonates very well with search professionals. What it is not is going to a Jen Cox NACD event and handing out business cards. That is not good networking.
I really appreciate all of your
Just one quick thing I will say. One good thing about the NACD events is there are actually directors there.
Yeah,
Directors or GCs or CEOs and the like, people that can, if you don't have that network currently, you got to get it, because if they don't know who you are, they're never going to pick you.
That is true. So true.
Well, and I think that those are really good points, because NACD is a great forum for for meeting people. But when you meet them, you need to provide value, because I think, the way you network is a reflection of how you'll be as a director, right? Do you come into a group and try to add value, right? And people will take the data from how you approach them from a networking perspective and extrapolate from that whether they would want to serve with you. So it's always good to keep that in mind. But I just want to reiterate Steve's point about, even though we're talking about cautions and difficulty and challenge, this really is wonderful work to do. And it's so meaningful because it's so important to every organization to be well governed, right? That's critical. And to the extent we all contribute to that, we're doing a great service to the world to have better governed businesses out there.